So, dating. That's a curious question. If I push anything too far, let me know. But I'm curious about your interpretation or your opinions on dating and when it comes to being trans. And the most easy question to ask is probably, or the first question naturally, is what about, do you think it's transphobic to not want to date a trans person?
No, I do not. That is one thing the left will never make me say. I don't think it's transphobic to have a preference on who you date. I don't think it's transphobic, or I don't think it makes you a bad person to have any kind of preference. I think people are allowed to date who they want to date and not date who they don't want to date.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. I will say it's interesting because I've always thought about it, and like I don't personally care, but I've thought about the idea because it's just a preference, and I think as long as you're being respectful, I think that you agree. Who cares? If you're telling somebody you're not going to date them and you're calling them slurs, I think that's probably transphobic. But if you're just like, no, thank you, I don't think see that's an issue. But do
Right.
you think that there is some kind of, and this is like a weird question, maybe deep seated, I don't use the word homophobia, and I'm using that word intentionally, to some people who may not want to date a trans person, specifically because if somebody didn't want to date a trans man, or excuse me, a trans woman or trans man, for instance, that could be because they interpret that person still as a woman. And so they're like, I don't really want to date a woman. And do you think that would, do you think what do you think about that?
I don't necessarily think that's true, but I don't really think it matters. It's like if
No.
someone doesn't want to date you if someone doesn't want to date me because they see me as a man, cool. Like I probably wouldn't want to date that person either because they clearly don't see me as the way I
Yeah.
want to be seen. Um, so I mean, I don't know, maybe
That's
to a
how
degree,
I feel
but
about it. It's one of those things where it's almost just like an interesting thought, but it's nothing that I would go around and be like, you're some kind of homophobic. I wouldn't say it to anybody. I just thought it was an interesting thought. That's the only reason I asked that.
I think people say a lot of things until they're met with a situation where they have an opportunity with someone they do find attractive.
That's
Um,
probably true. Yeah, I definitely
so
can understand that.
I don't know.
When it
I don't
comes,
know.
yeah, no, it was an interesting thing. Somebody had mentioned the idea of it, and I was like, okay, I could explore that just for fun, but I wouldn't in practice. I don't think it really matters. But I can see, well, there are some people, some of the narrative, which I think hurts trans people, because I think most trans people just want to be seen as valid, is, this idea that you're transphobic if you wouldn't date a trans person, which has spawned the super straight thing. I don't know if you remember super straight on TikTok, where you were like, you were extra straight. That was what do you, that was wild.
It
What
was wild.
what do you think about super straight?
I think it was just a stupid trend. Like, does anyone even say it anymore? Like, I
No,
thought
they
it wasn't
don't.
a thing.
They did it for like a few months, and then it went. There was like a super straight flag. I think it was like orange or something. It was wild.
It's just so funny because it's like I would love to get like all the people who identify as super straight and just I wish we could like put them in a room with like cameras alone with like the most attractive trans woman that's just like so like down to do anything and just see like what they would do. Because I feel like more than 50% of them would end up like not being super straight. But
Probably, I think so. Before you were talking about your OnlyFans too. It seems like there a lot of conservative men gravitated towards that, and they're most likely attracted to you if they're going to your OnlyFans. So it seems like there's a lot of people who are attracted to trans people, but they're coping, like they want to pretend like they're not valid, but then they go look at the OnlyFans and whatnot.
or they're just curious. I'm sure some people go there just because they want to see.
That's fair
Even
too.
if they're just not necessarily attracted to
Like
it.
just medical reasons is what you're saying. Just like research, they're doing just research.
Yeah,
Okay,
just doing
I'm
research,
sure
right?
that's
That's what a lot of them are doing.
I'm sure
That's what
it's
they tell
just
their wives.
yeah. Well, I imagine they don't tell their wife.
Yeah, well, that's probably what's actually happening, you're right.
Um, so when it comes to dating, a little bit more of an intimate question, but I've seen trans people express frustration when it comes to dating because they're worried about the person that they're dating still perceiving them as, like, what would you say, like their assigned sex. I think that's the
Gender
right,
at birth.
yeah, whichever. I think it's assigned sex or at birth, or gender at birth. But have you ever experienced something like that? Because I've seen some trans people say that they're not attracted to bisexual people because they don't want to engage with somebody who would potentially um, perceive them as their born sex. And
I mean, they can phrase it that way, but I think it's more like I don't know. I think it might be more to do with the fact that like why do a lot of biological women or cis women not want to date like bisexual men?
Hmm.
Because I think it's just like a thing where very feminine men or feminine women want to be with like the straightest of straight men, you know? Like
Sure.
I think to some women, not to say this is like an offensive thing, like I'm not like putting down bisexual people at all, but just realistically speaking, I think a lot of women, trans or not, just don't want to date bisexual men because they don't find it attractive to be with a man that's sleeping with other men. Is that
I've heard.
offensive to say? I don't
You
even know if
know,
I'm gonna get
I'm
canceled
be
again for that.
I'm gonna be honest with you. I don't know if it's offensive to say. I don't think you're saying it hatefully, but I've heard that before from women and cis women too. Like that is something that some women will say that they don't like. They would almost lose respect for a guy, especially if they ever knew that they, they took it, they received information. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
So I've heard that before. It's interesting, and it kind of gets into, I guess, a conversation about masculinity. Um, Yeah, I've heard that before. I don't know if that's offensive. I think it's okay to have a preference, of course. But I've heard that before. I feel bad for bisexual men, I guess, at this point. Sorry, guys.
Yeah, I feel like that's why I mean, I hate to say it, but I feel like that gives them all the more reason to be like, "Oh, well, I'm gonna keep it hidden now." Like, I don't wanna say anything, and, like, I can't even
Yeah.
blame them for that, but it's just, like, the harsh realities of the world. Like, a lot of women are like that.
Yeah, that's true. I wonder where that comes from. I wonder if there's like a biological aspect or if there's some kind of socialization because I was having like a conversation with my wife a while back. And she's a behavioral specialist, so we have like very weird conversations sometimes. And I just had a brain fart. Hold on. We had a conversation about young people and like exploring sex, because when you're like a kid, it's gross to think about, but like sometimes you experiment. And when it's between women, that seems to, or girls, that seems to be not okay, but nobody says anything. But when it comes to young boys experimenting, there seems to be met with like some form of aggression. Like a gay young boy, I think, receives more negativity than maybe like a gay or a bisexual young girl, and that exploration isn't there. And I wonder if that all comes down for that, and really just like shitting on femininity historically, especially in men or specifically in men, whereas like masculine women don't get nearly as much flack as feminine men. And I wonder if it comes from something like that.
I mean, I wouldn't doubt it, especially with the way, like, our brains work during childhood, it would not surprise me if that's, like, a huge factor because 'cause you're just soaking up everything at that age.
Yeah, isn't that crazy? So all these bisexual men, they're just trying to live their authentic selves, and all these women are just shitting on them. Uh, so for you personally, and you don't have to answer this question, have you ever gone into a relationship or dated a guy or went on a date with a person where? Well, actually, I guess I should. Are you straight?
Yeah, I've actually been in a relationship for the past, so we met in 2019. It's, like, 4.5 years now.
I think I remember that. Yeah, I think I remember that. Yeah, good for you if that you guys lasting so long. When are you guys getting married? Is the next question.
We're so yeah, the thing is we met when we were 19, so,
No, I
like, we're so
understand.
young. We just bought a house, though. We're moving in, like,
Wow.
28 days, 27 days, something like that. So that's why I've been in the car. Everyone's like, "Why are you in your car?" It's like, because 'cause I'm living with my parents right now. We're trying to get a house,
Well,
but,
congratulations for that. That's a nice step. Living together is definitely good before you get married. It's a great idea to kind of,
yeah,
you
thanks.
know.
We lived together for, like, 3 we were just living in an apartment together for the past 3 years before we came up here.
Oh well, good for you guys. Okay, so you're straight. Um, have you ever kind of been on a date with somebody or dated somebody or interact with somebody where you did get the feeling that maybe they perceived you in some capacity as a man and it didn't feel as valid? And hopefully that it wasn't like a rude question. I'm just curious about the
No.
relationship that trans people have with dating and finding somebody that may not necessarily see them the way that they see themselves or what their authentic self is. And that's where I'm getting at with the question.
Yeah, my I've only been in 2 relationships my whole life, the one I'm currently in and the one before. I dated a guy for like 3 months who definitely I thought saw me as a woman, and I definitely think he was just using me as like a fetish. He would make comments like, "Oh, like I really like you, but you're never gonna be able to give me a baby,"
Oh,
or,
that's
you
horrible.
know, I remember one time, I'll never forget this. We were with his friends and I guess when I get stoned, I tend to, like, let my voice go a little bit, I guess,
Okay.
and I just tend to be a little more relaxed and I guess a tiny bit deeper, and I remember, like, his friends were all around, and I guess I was a little bit deeper toned, and he, like, kinda came in to, like, give me a kiss, and then, like, after the kiss was like, "Oh, shut the fuck up." or
Oh,
something like that.
Jesus Christ. I don't mean to laugh. That's
Um,
horrible.
yeah, and I remember one time we were in like the car and he was like, "Oh," I was like, I get like self-conscious about my voice sometimes." And he was like, or he made like a face like that, like when I asked like how like passable it was. So I don't know. There were just I definitely feel like that person saw me as male. Like I don't think they saw me as a woman, or at least in the way I wanted them to.
Yeah.
So that was definitely a relationship where I felt like I wasn't seen the way I am. It was kind of just shitty.
Yeah, that's really unfortunate. Do you feel like you're seen the way you're meant to be seen with your current partner?
Oh, absolutely. Zach is amazing.
That's
Zach
good.
is, I don't know how I got so lucky to have like my boyfriend, but he genuinely supports me, loves me, sees me as I am and how I feel I am. And I couldn't ask for a better person in my life. Honestly, I'm so much happier now.
That's good. That's a very beautiful thing. I know that love is a very beautiful thing. It's something that I've been appreciating a lot, especially since I met my wife. And it sounds like he's not bisexual. I'm just buzzing chops.
Yeah. He's never been with a man. So unless you
Uh,
count me.
well,
But
I would I would not, but okay. um,
you tell anyone on the right, like you ask them, every comment underneath the tweet when I bring up my relationship is your boyfriend's gay. Gay.
yeah, that's sorry. You threw me for a loop with that one. It's very interesting that you express that because I feel like a lot of people in general, but like especially women, have that thought of just kind of, at least again with my wife, I talk about my wife too much sometimes, but just that thought of wanting to be seen as like some form of valid and not be criticized and destroyed for any small or minor issue that they might have. It's just like a sense of security. So I can definitely appreciate and respect that. The
Right.
last question I want to ask when it comes to the dating sphere is what do you think about not telling people that you're trans before? They're two different things, hooking up and dating. And we'll start with hooking up.
Here's the thing. I could sit here and be politically correct and be like, of course, you need to tell every partner that you're trans
Yeah.
before you do anything with them, because that is the right answer. And that is what you're supposed to do to be a good human being.
Okay.
With that being said, if I was single and I had just come into like my new passability and I knew I wasn't like starting a relationship with these people and I was involved in hookup culture, especially when I was younger, would I be telling all these men I was trans? Probably not. So I get it. I get why trans people do it. Doesn't make it right. Doesn't mean it's not fucked up, but I understand why they do it because it's a huge validation thing for them, I'm sure.
Yeah. So I used to be on the side where you have to tell them before any physical interaction. I'm fine with getting the going on a date, but once you like kiss or anything else, you have to say it. And if not, it's like a horrible thing. Again, with my wife, we had like these hour-long conversations of it, and she asked me this question when it comes to hooking up, because I think when it comes to like dating, that's a different parameter. But when it comes to hooking up, she's like, well, what is the difference between that and not telling somebody that you're married and like cheating on your spouse? Like, what does it really matter? You're hooking up with them for like one night. Nothing really matters. You're not going to explode from having sex with a trans person. So what does it really matter? And that sat with me for a while. And I'm like, I still think you should say it like you're saying, but I don't really care now. It's like, I don't have a strong, but it's like, okay, if you have sex with a trans person, they don't tell you because you're hooking up. Well, that's another reason why hookup culture maybe isn't the best thing in the world. Maybe that's a problem. You didn't get to know somebody. What if they had an STD and you didn't know? You didn't screen them properly. There's bigger things to worry about. So that's how I feel
Right.
with
I
that.
didn't really think about it like that. I think you're right, honestly.
Yeah, that hit me. I was like, oh fuck. I thought about that one for a while. It took me like months to like settle into that, but I was like, no, that doesn't make any sense. And then slowly it was like, oh shit, she's right. That doesn't mean anything. And there is no harm. And again, when it comes to dating, I think it's a very different thing. It's a very intimate thing, especially if you're building a relationship. You want to be with somebody that you know fully, and you just want to know somebody completely. And I think if you're in a dating scenario, you should express to somebody that you're trans, of course. When it comes to hooking up, I mean, like nothing matters. And people act like if you sleep with the trans person and you didn't realize it, then you're going to die. And that's the internalized homophobia that I was talking
Right.
about before. That's what it makes sense. Of course, to protect yourself, I would say in a hookup scenario, like you might want to say something because some people are horrible and they'll really hurt people.
Yeah. But I totally agree with you, honestly. Like I feel like dating, you need to tell them. Obviously, you're building a relationship with someone, and if you don't tell them, it's all on lies. But like hooking up, I mean, yeah, you're right. Like you're just hooking up with someone. They could be married, they could have an STD, it could be anything.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think you're right when it comes to the hookup culture. I don't think it matters.
Yeah, it's one of those things where when it comes to that, there's so many issues where I feel like we're forced to have an opinion on, or a strong opinion on the internet. But as I get older and I realize it more, I've realized nobody seems to have ever say when it comes to anything like, I just don't have a strong opinion on that. Everybody seems to have almost a performative opinion, and everything's so hyperbolic. I don't know if this is something that you've ever noticed, where anything that happens, you have to have like, okay, this is how I feel, either yes or no, very strongly. And this is one of those things where I just don't feel very strongly, but like whatever. But people will have a meltdown. People get very upset, and I've seen people compare it to being sexually assaulted. And sorry if that
Right.
was a little too triggering. I was wondering how you felt about like the comparison of hooking up with a trans person that you didn't know was trans, and comparing that to some form of sexual assault.
I think that's bull.
Me
I
too.
think that's just people wanting to be homophobic, transphobic, whatever you want to call it. They're like, oh, you're going to trick me, throw them in jail. I think it's so funny how they spend all this time talking about this topic, yet the other half of the time they're like, trans women shouldn't be like, trans women trick people. Or like, I can't tell if a trans woman's trans, but like, then I'm going to complain about being tricked the other 50% of the time.
Yeah.
It's like, if you guys can always tell, why does this matter anyways? What's the point of this conversation?
Well, I imagine if they couldn't tell, then everybody wins, right?
Right.
Then it wouldn't matter. But that would be providing healthcare to everybody. That's a bad thing too for them. But yeah, I find it very disproportionate. Like I said, I think it's comparable to like sleeping with somebody that was like married and you didn't know that they were cheating. I don't think that it's this deep violation and removal of autonomy. It is to an extent. It is well. I mean, you could debate over whether it's a lie or not. And if they don't ask, is it a lie or
Right.
is it? But
Still shitty behavior on the husband's part,
yeah,
but
well, oh no, that I didn't mean like that. I meant like to not say you're trans. I don't know if it's a lie if you're just hooking up because the question never came up. But then obviously, what's the
right.
generally expected? So I can see why you might be a little upset. But to call it sexual assault, I think that's a very horrible thing to happen to somebody, and like a complete removal of autonomy. And it's very disproportionate to me for people compare it to that, because that's another way of just kind of diminishing sexual assault. In the same way that conservatives diminish what grooming is when they say that anything that it comes to kids is some form of grooming. It's a very interesting hyperbolic language used by everybody all over the place. It's rather preposterous to me.
Right. They're making the word lose its power,
Yeah,
honestly.
yeah, it's losing a lot of its impact, and it's just an unfortunate thing, especially to survivors of stuff like that. So